Thanks for your patience, everyone. Call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 102 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, also known as, of course, the Maniogo. For the first 2 hours, the committee resuming a study on the ArriveCAN application pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, October 17, 2022. Committee is meeting on the study of the ArriveCAN application. As always, reminder not to put the earpieces near the microphones because it causes feedback and potential injury to our very valued interpreters. We have with us the Auditor General. I understand there's an opening statement, probably a brand new original one that we haven't heard this week. Welcome back to OGO. The floor is yours, Madam Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And no, it is the same opening statement that you heard yesterday, but it's a good one. So, Mr. Chair, I am pleased to be here today to discuss our audit report on the ArriveCAN application, which was tabled in the House of Commons on Monday. I wish to acknowledge that the lands on which we are gathered are part of the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I am accompanied today by Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General, Sami Hanoush, and Lucie Després, who were responsible for the audit. Our audit of the ArriveCAN application looked at how the Canada Border Services Agency, the Public Health Agency of Canada, and Public Services and Procurement Canada managed the procurement and development of the application, and whether they spent public funds in a way that delivered value for money. I will discuss our findings, but first I have to say that I am deeply concerned by what this audit didn't find. We didn't find records to accurately show how much was spent on what, who did the work, or how and why contracting decisions were made. And that paper trail should have existed. Overall, this audit shows a glaring disregard for basic management and contracting practices throughout ArriveCAN's development and implementation.
Government organizations needed to be flexible and fast in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, but they still needed to document their decisions and demonstrate the prudent use of public funds. In this audit, we found disappointing failures and omissions everywhere we looked. Most concerning was that the Canada Border Services Agency did not have complete and accurate financial records. Because of this, we were unable to calculate the exact cost of the ArriveCAN application. By piecing together information available, we estimated that ArriveCAN cost approximately $59.5 million. There was confusion right from the beginning. From April 2020 to July 2021, we found that the Public Health Agency of Canada and the Canada Border Services Agency did not work together to establish each agency's responsibilities for ArriveCAN. In this accountability void, neither organization developed and implemented good project management practices, such as developing objectives and goals, and budgets and cost estimates. In our examination of contracting practices, we saw little documentation to support how and why the Canada Border Services Agency initially awarded GC Strategies the ArriveCAN contract through a non-competitive process. Only one potential contractor submitted a proposal, and that proposal did not come from GC Strategies.
We found evidence that GC Strategies was involved in the development of requirements that were used when the agency later moved to a competitive process to award a $25 million contract for work on the ArriveCAN app. The requirements were very specific and narrow. This gave GC Strategies an advantage that other potential bidders did not have. We also found that the Canada Border Services Agency's overall management of contracts was poor. Essential information was missing from awarded contracts such as clear deliverables and the qualifications required of workers. When we looked at invoices approved by the agency, details about the work performed and who did the work were often missing. This greatly contributed to our conclusion that the best value for money was not achieved.
Finally, we found no evidence that Canada Border Services Agency employees disclosed invitations to private functions they received from contractors, as is required by the agency's Code of Values and Ethics. This created a significant risk or perception of a conflict of interest or bias around procurement decisions. Public servants must always be transparent and accountable to Canadians for their use of public funds. An emergency does not mean that all the rules go out the window, and that departments and agencies are no longer required to document their decisions and keep complete and accurate records. As I said earlier, I believe that this audit of ArriveCan shows a glaring disregard for basic management practices. As a result, many questions that parliamentarians and Canadians are asking cannot be answered. The lack of information to support ArriveCan spending and decisions has compromised accountability. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
AG Hogan. We'll start Mrs. Block, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Hogan, and to your colleagues for joining us here today. I know you've had a very busy week. I'm not sure it's going to get less busy as a result of the very scathing report that you tabled on Monday. In that report, you found that there was no evidence of contact between CBSA and GC Strategies to solicit a bid for the initial ArriveCan contract. However, you did note, and this would have been in section 138 and 139 on page 10, that one bid had been submitted by a company which was not GC Strategies. Now, we have heard testimony at this committee that two options for ArriveCan were presented. What I don't understand is how the option for ArriveCan that was ultimately chosen could have been presented if there was no bid from GC Strategies. Did you look at the two options presented to Min Doan and John Osowski to see if there were companies attached to them? Did you examine how the option for ArriveCan was chosen if there was no bid submitted? And who created the option for ArriveCan that led to GC Strategies? I recognize there's a number of questions there. I can repeat them if needed once you start answering.
So thank you. I'll try to answer them all, but I might look to Sammy Hanish to add some detail. As we reported in our audit, officials at the Canada Border Services Agency told us that their decision to award the contract to GC Strategies was based on a proposal they had received from them. However, that proposal was not on file and not provided to us. We are aware that 3 organizations were approached, even though it was a non-competitive process. Typically, the public service approaches a few vendors to see a proposal just to know what they could do. One proposal was received from those 3 vendors, and it was not from GC Strategies, yet the non-competitive contract was given to GC Strategies, and we found very little documentation about interactions with the vendor or the reasons why. We did see an email between the Canada Border Services Agency and Public Service and Procurement Canada authorizing the contract and supporting why to award it to GC Strategies, yet there was no evidence to support the statements made in that email. And that's why we concluded that there was very little documentation or proof as to why they were selected and how they had the skills and competencies to deliver on the contract.
Thank you very much. In regard to who chose GC Strategies, you indicated in a response to my colleague, Mr. Brock, yesterday at the Public Accounts Committee, that you were unclear as to whether it was Ms. Belanger or Mr. Doan. And that when he asked, once you gave that response, he asked if you had sought clarification with CBSA. The response was no. Can you explain to us why your office would not have gone back to CBSA to get that clarification, given the damning report that is in front of us?
So the piece, the communication that you're talking about is some information that we did not receive from the Canada Border Services Agency. It was not provided in official records. We received it from Mr. McDonald. When you look at it, and I've gone back to look at it since yesterday, it is it appears to be a briefing note to prepare Ms. Belanger for committee appearance. At the time, I believe she was the acting chief information officer at Canada Border Services Agency. But when you look at that document, it includes sample questions and possible answers. There's a lot of answers in there that are inaccurate or incorrect. And so it was a piece of evidence that we didn't have anything to corroborate it from. And in fact, we could disprove many of the proposed answers as being inaccurate. And so we didn't feel it was necessary to return to Canada Border Services Agency and ask them any more about that document.
Thank you very much. I guess I'll follow up by just asking, in your investigation into ArriveCAN and GC Strategies and the awarding of these contracts, did you speak to any of the individuals named that in the internal investigation? Did you speak with Mr. McDonald, Mr. Utano, anyone from GC Strategies, or were you simply looking at the processes involved by CBSA in the awarding of contracts?
So during our audit, we do speak with public servants who are still working in the public service. So we did speak with Mr. Utano, Mr. McDonald, and Mr. Dewan. We do not interact with private corporations or private citizens. And so we rely that the public service should be maintaining full, complete, and accurate records of their interactions unless there's reason for us to. But in this case, we did not. No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kuzmierczak, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Hogan, for your tremendous work to you and your team. We're on the same side here. We want to make sure that we improve accountability. This is about accountability and making sure that that if there is wrongdoing, that we hold those to account, the public servants to account that conducted that wrongdoing and those breaches of the controls and the code of conduct. So I thank you very much for your work. I wanted to ask you, the ArriveCAN app was built under extraordinary circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic. The app was built in 30 days. It was built, it's a complex a system that was downloaded 18 million times by folks across all platforms. It protects the privacy of those of persons using the app, including their very sensitive health information. It was also the information that it gathered was also shared securely across provincial health agencies within minutes, almost instantly. And the app was also accessible. And when we spoke with CBSA officials here that came before us, they said they didn't have the in-house capabilities to be able to pull this off in such a short period of time. In your report on page 16, you raised a concern. You stated that the Canada Border Service Agency had consistent requests for resources with the highest levels of IT experience. And again, the report states, in our view, this meant that the agency likely paid for senior resources when work could have been done by resources with less experience that are paid less. If you can kind of explain to us, how do how would you recommend, or how do we balance, for example, the need for cost effectiveness versus needing, again, high expertise to be able to pull off a complex piece of software in such a short period of time?
So I do agree that the application was developed and launched very quickly. Much of what the public service was doing at that time during the pandemic was being fast and effective to help support Canadians. What we were looking here was whether or not the government had achieved the best value for money, and whether they could justify some of the decisions that have been made. And what we saw is there was very little justification for repeatedly asking for IT experience with 10 years or more, which is the highest level that is typically contracted out in the government. And, at the beginning, that might have made sense. We would have expected that as time progressed, that was likely not needed throughout the whole time that reliance was on external resources. So it's an assessment that normally you would see at the outset, figuring out if you had good project management practices in place, you would do an assessment of the needs and the resources and the skills that you need. And that was when we paid likely too much for the app because of that heavy long-term reliance on external resources, often at the highest level. I guess the one last thing I would add about that is we did see instances where individuals who were charged on invoices did not have 10 years of experience or more, yet the government paid the rate of experience for 10 years. So again, contributing to not good value for money.
Thank you. I also noticed in your report you had zeroed in on the information science and technology branch of the CBSA, and you raised the issue that one of the issues is that they seem to have a direct path to PSPC. They bypassed CBSA's own procurement directorate. Can you speak about why this is a concern and why this needs to be rectified?
So
and how big of an issue is that?
Sure. So Public Service and Procurement Canada is really the contracting specialist of the government, and they typically play an important role in ensuring that departments follow the policies and best practices in contracting. That being said, every department and agency typically has their own procurement branch that would also ensure that specific policies within the agency or department are followed, and usually be sort of that intermediary between the business owner, those looking to contract out or do something in the department and agency, and Public Service and Procurement Canada. So it's another layer of ensuring that policies and procedures are followed, that the government achieves best value for money. And so many of the things we would normally see done by the public service would be done. And that's why the two procurement arms play a key role. I would tell you it's an important key control in ensuring that procurement is well done and well documented in the public service.
You called it a challenge function. So this directorate could have challenged, for example, some of the decisions that were made. Is that correct?
Public Service and Procurement Canada is the challenge function. They're the ones who, in this instance, we saw them, push back when Canada Border Service Agency said, we're going to do a sole source. They said, well, why not do a competitive process? Why not try to run a shorter one? Ultimately, the department doing the contracting, in this case, Canada Border Service Agency, has the final decision, and they decided at the start to do a non-competitive contract. So the challenge function comes from PSPC. The internal procurement branch is there to help ensure that policies are followed and that controls are in place when it comes to contracting.
Sir, that is our time. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 6.
Merci. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Hogan and Mr. Hayes and Mr. Hanouch, Ms. Desprez. It's been a very busy week for you. I can well imagine. I would like to sum up what you said in your opening remarks. Processes were not respected. Not only were they not respected in terms of awarding contracts, in addition, there is a lack of documentation to support the decisions that were taken, if I've understood correctly. And these processes are part of policies. They're determined by policies, and all public servants have to comply, whether there's a pandemic or not. Is that correct? I would say yes, but I would say that at the beginning of the pandemic, the Treasury Board had given flexibility to the public services so that they could respond effectively and quickly to serve Canadians. But that flexibility came with a reminder that decisions taken had to be well documented and to have proper accountability. And I recall that Treasury Board's requirement, flexibility in terms of the results that were to be attained, but nonetheless keeping an eye on expenditures and the quality of the process. In no way did flexibility mean setting aside the usual methodology used by the public servants. That is correct. That is my interpretation of the communication between the Treasury Board Secretariat, and that was the way it was understood by the public service. In your opinion, are there any other situations where processes were not respected, where contracts were awarded without tendering, or where we might have seen vendors draft or give their proposals to government and then, posted as if it was their own idea? Did we see any of that during the pandemic? I cannot talk about behind my time as Auditor General, but as to other contracts that we examined during the pandemic and since my nomination in June 2020, well, I've seen many opportunities to improve the processes for awarding contracts to vendors. But in this case, it really was a flagrant disregard for the rules. Your report is very useful. We've already discussed that this week in another committee, but it is shocking. Sincerely, it is shocking to note that an application that could have cost a few, tens of thousands of monies actually cost 59.5 million, maybe even more, maybe a bit less, because there is no documentation. But there have been other applications developed during the pandemic, notably COVID alert. And if my colleagues will allow, I'm going to table a motion which we could discuss later, which ties in with applications. And I'm going to read it, and it will then be sent to you. Pursuant to 108.1 of our rules, the committee ordered the government and PSPC to produce in the two official languages a copy of all of the contracts, communications, memos, tenders, and with GC strategies in keeping with the COVID alert application and all government communications or internal communications from all government entities or departments to do with the Alert COVID app by March 15th, 2024, providing these documents be exempt from all
GC strategy, c'est en lien avec une
redaction. So that is in keeping with PSPC, and that would be health as well, the health department, PSPC, and then we could discuss this motion if you so desire a little later. But I think what we have here is work that we have to do in regard to GC strategies as well as the employees having to do with transfers to the health.
To the clerk.
dans les prochaines secondes.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Appreciate that.
C'est fait.
Wonderful. Mr. Bachrach, please, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Auditor General for appearing on this very important topic. And I must say that there's a lot of anger and frustration around the findings of your report, and I think rightly so. When we look at $50 to $60 million, I represent a region in Northwest British Columbia that is mostly rural and remote communities that have a huge number of needs that could be taken care of with $50 to $60 million. I think of the city of Prince Rupert that desperately needs to replace its water pipes and needs tens of millions of dollars of investment in core infrastructure. I think of Smithers, Fort St. James, Port Clements. All of them need wastewater treatment facilities that cost millions of dollars. Takla needs a new school. These are all things that could be funded with the money that this government wasted on this app. And it's frustrating and angering that gross either incompetence or negligence or certainly what looks like misconduct has led to so much public money being wasted. So I'll start on that note. The questions we have really have to do with procurement more broadly and the use of subcontractors to do the work that the public service should be able to do. And I'll start with paragraph 1.39 of your report. You noted that GC Strategies was awarded a contract for ArriveCan without any documentation and without having submitted a proposal. And your report says, quote, there was no evidence that the agency considered a proposal or any similar document from GC Strategies for this non-competitive contract. I'm curious what documentation your investigation was privy to in this regard. Was it only emails, or were you able to examine phone records, text messages, et cetera, on both personal and government devices? And do you suspect that the discussions with GC Strategies to be awarded the contract took place on channels that you didn't have access to?
So normally we look to official records of the organization, however they might be maintained. And I guess it's important to highlight that items like text messages or emails or MS Teams conversations are meant to be transitory. So normally in an audit, unless they're of business value, in which case they should be saved and kept in official repositories or official documentation. In this case, because there was so much missing information that the files were rather thin, we did turn to these transitory documents to try and hopefully fill in some of the blanks. But when it came to a proposal, as I mentioned earlier, while we were told that the decision was based on a proposal submitted by GC Strategies, there was none for us to review or look at, and we didn't need a big deck. We would have expected anything to just outline what GC Strategies could do and demonstrate how they had the skills and competencies to deliver on the needs of the government, and we did not see that.
Just following on that question, did you come away with a sense that officials in charge of this project were using certain channels because they were less likely to be scrutinized?
Again, I can't speak to the intent of what they were doing. What I can tell you is at times we did have to go to either emails to find some evidence of discussions or exchanges. At times, some of the documentation was maintained by Public Service and Procurement Canada, and it was provided to us. But all of that should have been maintained by the Canada Border Services Agency, as they were the ones who are entering into the contractual relationship with the vendor. And they have an obligation to make sure that that's properly documented to show accountability for the use of public funds.
On the topic of public service capacity, and you mentioned the fact that the government was essentially paying for top-tier resources, but the people doing the actual work on the project were less experienced and less skilled. Was there a considerable amount of work done on this app that could have been accomplished by the public service itself, in your view?
So at the beginning of this, we did look to see whether the Canada Border Services Agency and the Public Health Agency of Canada had done an assessment, and they did. It was a quick, small assessment, but it was an assessment that the public service did not have the skills and, more importantly, the capacity at that time to develop this app. And I think it was a reasonable decision to seek out support from third party, from the private sector, to develop the app, given the circumstances, if you put yourself back in March and April of 2020. But what we would have expected to see was that eventually that dependency on a contractor would have decreased over time, so as to show that you are either transferring parts of the operation, the maintenance, or the ongoing day-to-day functioning over to the public service, and that you are upskilling or transferring knowledge to the public service to be able to diminish that dependency on a third party, and we did not see that.
Thank you for that. Now,
You've got about
GC
10 seconds, Mr. Backrack.
okay. GC Strategies is essentially a headhunter. Can the public service not do its own IT recruiting? It seems like a role that surely could be accomplished by the public service itself.
Again, that was a decision we were hoping that we would have seen properly documented. Why GC Strategies, and how did they have the skills and competencies to develop the ArriveCAN application? And we did not find documentation to support that.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan.
Mrs. Kusi, please, for 5.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome back, Ms. Hogan, to our group. You stated in paragraph 1.19 that 18% of invoices submitted by contractors did not have supporting documentation to explain if expenses related to ArriveCAN or other IT projects. You also state that GC Strategies was paid $19.1 million to build ArriveCAN, $8 million more than $8 million than we projected previously. Is there a possibility that this number is higher than $19.1 million due to the pay discrepancies?
So the breakdown in that exhibit is the dollars spent allocated by contractor on ArriveCAN. What's important to know there is that's what the Canada Border Service Agency and their financial records have said was paid to a vendor and allocated to that contract. We had difficulty at times seeing the evidence to support that the expenditures on invoices were actually linked to ArriveCAN and not another IT project. So the dollar amounts listed by vendor could be higher or lower. It really just speaks to the poor financial record keeping at the Canada Border Service Agency.
So it could be higher, that this is possible. In section 1.53, you state that the agency reached out to firms they wanted to work with and slotted them into pre-existing contracts with GC Strategies through task authorizations. The CBSA also stated that $12.2 million are not properly accounted for due to lack of TA documentation. Was this an issue with GC Strategies or with the CBSA?
So in my view, these were two examples of procedures that the Canada Border Service Agency should not do. I would have expected that if the Canada Border Service Agency felt that they had an existing relationship with a vendor that they knew was able to deliver on something, that they should enter into a contractual obligation directly with them. We do not know. It's not clear why then the vendor was given a task authorization under a GC Strategy contract. So those are examples of things I would have expected to see CBSA do better at, because there are procurement rules around that.
Right. So we know in this room that GC Strategies has been contracting with this Liberal government since it began in 2015, but we just found out today that they have made over $250 million in that period of time, $250 million. I mean, that is a lot of money. Are you concerned that GC Strategies has been using these same tactics to procure lucrative contracts in other areas of government?
So I can't speak to the profit margins of a private corporation. That's not something that we audit. And I was responding to a motion here from the House of Commons in order to look at the ArriveCAN application, and that's what I can speak to today.
Could you give any assurances to Canadians today that the company has not continuously been engaged in these practices across these past 8 years?
I can only talk to what I saw as procurement rules, procurement processes or gaps in procurement processes between the Canada Border Services Agency and the vendors that were used for the ArriveCan application.
Are you concerned that the 180-day suspension for GC strategies at the CBSA will be lifted on May 1st of this year?
So again, these are decisions that the public service has taken that I did not audit and really can't comment on.
You think that the company has been properly assessed to see if they are within the federal government's procurement guidelines?
Again, when it was a non-competitive process, I would have expected during the initial contract award for the ArriveCan application to see a proper assessment done. But as we noted in our audit report, there is very little documentation to support why GC Strategies was selected.
Would you see a comparison between the McKinsey consulting study that you are currently working on, the report which is due out in May, I understand, and perhaps an extension of a study into GC strategies? Because it seems to me that McKinsey would be a third-party external consultant that you are currently auditing within the government and the use of the government of this company. Would you not say that's something similar? If your evaluation of their practices or that as far as they apply to this ArriveCan report?
So I think both vendors are professional services contracts, and that's what our audit is looking at, that we expect to table later this year. It will be broader than just looking at professional services contracts linked to ArriveCan. So I normally do not comment on the results of an audit until we make it public in the House of Commons.
Thank
Like
you
the organizations
very
are
much.
similar. Thank you very
That
much,
is their
Mr.
time.
Chair. Thank you,
Mr. Baines,
Auditor
please go
General.
ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Hogan, for joining us today and all of our witnesses. Again, this whole study that's being conducted here, extremely important, and it's led us to multiple different directions, and we're trying to uncover, where were these decisions made, and ultimately an investigation is going on. We understand that, and we can't delve into the investigation itself as the other authorities are conducting it. But have you seen any evidence of corruption?
So when it comes to matters of a criminal nature, I would tell you that the expert in this area is the RCMP, and I will leave that evaluation to them.
So you're not in any way involved in that piece of the investigation. You're looking at discrepancies and documentation and those sorts of things.
It's the RCMP's responsibility to look into matters of a criminal nature, not the Auditor General's office, no.
Okay, thank you. And it would be safe to say that this kind of contracting occurs at the officials level, like from your study into the work that you've been conducting. The contracting that takes place is public service officials that are involved. No one are there any political level members involved in this? Has that come across anywhere? And ministers signing off on this?
So I think in a situation like this, when so much goes wrong, I would tell you that every level of management is responsible and accountable for this. It isn't just contracting decisions. It was poor project management. It was poor testing of an IT system before it went live. So there was so much that didn't happen the way it should happen. I would tell you that it's all the levels of management within the public service. When it comes to briefings, again, with a no governance structure or oversight mechanism set up, we saw very little of that. We did see some email exchanges where, the deputy was aware of things, but very little briefing. So, the thinness of the file is such that I can't comment on briefings to anyone outside of the public service.
Information sharing did not go far enough. Is that where decisions were made?
So if briefings occurred, they were not maintained. So you would have expected to see something formal about a briefing to a deputy head or to the political arm, and there's no evidence of this on file in a formal way.
So okay, I recall asking the question to Mr. Doan specifically, like who made this decision, and he said, "Well, the team made the decision." And I said, well, how many members are on the team? He said 1,600. And then I said 1,600 people made the decision. Then it came to, no, well, there were 6 board members. So we're still sort of uncovering that. And were you able to sort of pinpoint those decisions at some point out of all those people that you just mentioned? Management
So
team?
as we noted in the audit report, we were unable to determine exactly who made the decision to award the contract to GC Strategies. And I guess I would tell you 2 things. One is I would expect that a deputy head is always answerable for all questions that happen in their organization. And that's why management plays an important role. The assistant deputy ministers, the director generals, the directors, they all play an important role in ensuring that policies are followed and the right tone is sent so that files are properly documented. In this case, what we did see around the decision is that the executive director signed off on a contract requisition, which is authorizing Public Service and Procurement Canada to issue the contract. In my view, when a public servant exercises the delegation of authority that is given to them, that comes with responsibility and accountability. Now, if they felt that they had been pressured or didn't want to do this, then they should have informed their supervisor, someone else in the agency, or followed any of the mechanisms that are available when they feel that they're being pressured. And we saw none of that. So.
There's no evidence of that.
So we saw that the executive director signed the contract requisition. And in my view, that comes with responsibility and accountability.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Mr. Baines. You had about 10 seconds left, but I'll add it on to your next round. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. Hogan, earlier you said that there was no trace. Well, there were invitations issued for dinners, but there was no trace of these invitations or the gifts received. But is there a trace that there was acceptance on the part of the public servants of these invitations?
And we see
the code of conduct of the CBSA requires that employees advise their supervisors, and we saw no evidence that this was done. I discussed with certain individuals. They confirmed if it was done verbally, we don't have any evidence, but it's important to have this documentation to show that there was a process in place to avoid the conflict of interest or apparent conflict of interest, but we saw no such documentation. So do we have the evidence that they went to those dinners? We have no evidence, but the code of conduct is such that even if you don't attend, you have to advise your supervisor that you received an invitation. So based on interviews, we cannot answer the question with certainty. Earlier, there was talk about the Treasury Board Secretariats urging that flexibility in terms of achieving results and due diligence. Now, with that Treasury Board advice, did the Treasury Board issue any steps to follow, or was it just a directive, advisory? There was a letter sent to the public service, sent by the Treasury Board Secretariats. And this was very clear. Flexibility in the usual processes, which are sometimes very stringent, but decisions taken had to be documented. So there was no requirement as to how the documentation had to be done, but decisions need to be documented for accountability to Canadians.
Mr. Bachrach, please, for 2.5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Hogan, for your responses so far. I think, we're getting to this question of whether this is a situation specific to the ArriveCan app and specific to the conditions of the pandemic, or whether this is something more systemic throughout government procurement. And recalling the circumstances in which the ArriveCan app drew people's focus and attention, it really started with the public health components of the app, and now we're talking about potential misconduct when it comes to procurement. Is this something that is likely to be a problem across government procurement, in your view?
So I can't really speak to that because this audit was really focusing in on the procurement process around ArriveCan. I can tell you that the procurement ombuds, who recently released a report, looked at procurement at the Canada Border Service Agency and raised similar concerns. I would tell you that our recommendations were rather quite aligned. And when I read his report, I think I was left with the impression that he was as perplexed as I was about the lack of documentation at the Canada Border Service Agency around procurement. I do believe, if you have 2 seconds, that Andrew Hayes would like to add something, if possible.
Sure.
Yeah, just that it's interesting that the procurement ombudsman did suggest in a recommendation that PSPC should retract the authority of CBSA to issue task authorizations. That's a pretty significant recommendation, and I think when the president appeared yesterday at the Public Accounts Committee, she mentioned the fact that actions were being taken that she described as belts and suspenders to address what might be issues that could be a little bit broader. She's taking a different approach that might be more severe right now.
If I could ask one more question, my colleague Gord Johns brought forward a motion to expand this committee's outsourcing study to look at government contracts being given to the big six consulting companies: Deloitte, KPMG, McKinsey, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Accenture, and Ernst & Young. Can you tell me about your office's plans for such an audit? And is this something we can expect to see in the near future?
I'm afraid the answer will have to be in the near future because we're out of time, but perhaps
Thanks,
we can get
Mr.
back
Chair.
to your next round. Mr. Genuis, please, for 5.
Madam Auditor General, we have in front of us a devastating audit showing outrageous cost overruns, rigging of contracts, a mysterious absence of documents, and the breaking of ethics rules on a sole source contract for an app that didn't work and sent at least 10,000 people falsely into quarantine. This is the ArriveScam scandal, and it adds to things we already know about resume tampering, waste, cozy relationships with useless contractors, and in some cases, I think activity that is clearly criminal. What we do not yet know fully is the motivation animating the people involved in this scandal. None of this was necessary. None of this was normal. There's no plausible excuse for what happened. Why do you think they did it?
I'm unable to answer that question. I think that's something that an RCMP investigation would likely answer if they look into this matter.
Okay, but as far as you saw, you didn't see any indication of what was motivating the people involved in these actions, other than those who made money off it, I suppose, but the people inside of government.
I believe that the public servants were responding to a need. There was a need to improve the efficiency at the border, and the ArriveCan app, as we reported on in 2021, improve the quality of the information that was gathered at the border as travelers were coming in, and the ability of the government to
sorry to just jump in just because of the time limit. I mean, I understand that explains the perception of around having some kind of an app, but in terms of the way they operated specifically, the choices that were made around documentation, around rigging. Do you have any indication about what might have motivated that choices?
So when we spoke to individuals, they often told us that it was the pandemic and that they were just trying to respond to a need. But in my view, an emergency is not a reason to throw the rules out the window. You should still follow good procurement practices.
Yeah, essentially those are the same excuses that we're getting from the government right now. So, and I agree with you that that's not adequate. So we have an internal investigator looking into this now, apparently, but that internal investigator is subject to the authority of the president of the CBSA and has acknowledged that internal investigator that he is not independent. What failures does this audit point to specifically in the actions of the president's or around the president's office?
In terms of the audit findings, I'll answer this quickly. The failure of senior management will be in the oversight, the lack of oversight, the lack of monitoring. We mentioned that there wasn't a budget set up at the beginning. Very difficult to monitor whether a project is on time or on budget when you don't have a budget. But senior management should have been watching this.
So there's no way senior management can say, oh, well, this was a couple guys at mid-level. What you're saying is that there's an expectation of oversight. So if you can confirm that, but then also advise what expectations you would have had of PCO in terms of ensuring the proper processes along the way.
So I would agree that senior management should be watching what's happening in the organization, whether that's the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, or on a project that's spending a lot of money, the Executive Committee. In terms of the Privy Council Office, I would say that at this point we wouldn't have had expectations that they would be watching this, except for the fact that because of the nature of the pandemic, I think they would have been wanting to see that there was a way to collect information at the border in an efficient manner. And I would say it's understandable because this was under the the agency's authorities that CBSA should be responsible and accountable for how this happened.
So the department and the minister are responsible. You would have expected, because of the nature of the pandemic, that there would have been some questions about the process from PCO. Obviously, it's not the primary responsibility. Yeah, just quickly.
This was the responsibility of the Public Health Agency of Canada and the Canada Border Services Agency.
Okay, thank you. Madam Auditor General, is in your time working in this area as Auditor General, would you say that this is the worst you've ever seen?
Well, it's definitely very bad record keeping and financial record keeping. It's some of the worst financial record keeping I've ever seen. To have invoices that clearly did not have sufficient information to be able to validate that the services had been received, and then where to record them and what project to charge them to. I've testified yesterday about how we had to go through many journal entries at times that didn't really say much to get to the original journal entry, to find the source documentation, to then be able to trace it to a task authorization and see that it was linked to ArriveCan or not. That kind of record keeping, it shouldn't be that difficult to find out where money went and what it should be charged to.
Thanks. Mr. Shawari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Hogan, and your team for the work you've been doing and the amount of effort and testimony over the last 3 days. In your testimony, you and I quote, you indicated, and I quote, "We were unable to calculate the exact cost of a ArriveCan application, but by piecing together information available, we estimated the ArriveCan cost approximately $59.5 million. Now, over the last 3 days after that comment was made initially at Public Accounts, there are rampant numbers that's being thrown around. Can you tell me, when you talk about, or when you indicated an estimate usually comes with a range. Can you give us a sense of what that range is?
So when we said estimate here, it's because we're unclear whether there are additional expenses that I cannot guess that.
Can the application be $8 million?
No, there were many invoices, and very clear that a lot of these expenditures were linked to the ArriveCan.
Fair enough. Did you have an opportunity to look at? I know the breakdown of 59.9 is associated with how much is went to each one of the contractors. Did you ever came across any document that says this amount of money was gone to the development, this amount of money was gone into implementation, this amount of money gone to rollout, this amount of money was post-implementation support, document tracking, maintenance, passing this document? Is there any document around that we can really understand what is the development cost of that application and what's the other costs associated with it?
So I have seen a document that's available on the Canada Border Service Agency, I think, website. There's a document you can see there that breaks down. At the time, it was $55 million, I do believe, and it's broken down like that between cloud, between a call center, and so on. But we had difficulty just piecing it by contractor, that we didn't try to piece it together by type of work.
in public accounts, I was part of the group that MPs who were there. You talked about the value of money, and in your opinion, and I'm seeking clarification. Do you think there was value for money that we received?
So I would speak about value in two ways here. I would tell you that there was value received during the pandemic. And I made a reference earlier to our 2021 report where the ArriveCan app did improve the quality of the information collected from travelers and the timeliness of that information. And for example, at the time, the paper form in some instances was taking over 28 days to get to the public health agency, and it's hard to follow up on a 14-day quarantine. I would then tell you that there's an enduring value. That enduring value is that now the Canada Border Service Agency has used some of this to springboard to automate the border, the customs declaration form. But it's clear to me that the public service paid too much for the application.
Okay. You also, in your testimony, you said that probably the work could have been transitioned to CBSA after the application was developed, etc. Did you look into whether the CBSA, even at that time, had the capacity and the resources and the knowledge to be able to handle the support that's needed? Because I don't know. I see a lot of concerning issues, and thank you for highlighting it. And also, the CBSA has agreed to it. But does CBSA really have the resources to be able to even support an application like this?
So there were many factors that contributed to our assessment that this was not the best value for money. The one that you're highlighting is the long-term dependency on external resources. I would have expected to see CBSA do that analysis. You shouldn't embark on something and have a long-term objective to stay dependent on a vendor. You should be able to transition internally.
You, in your report, you indicated that there was a modification that made that led to about 10,000 people by mistake being held, going to quarantine. Did that study also had any numbers around how many times? I know my colleague talked about the 18 million download, but how many transactions had gone through that application?
So we didn't actually audit the ArriveCan application itself. The motion was to look at the procurement, the development, and the implementation, and not the functionality. What we were looking at there were releases to the application. There was 177 releases. We looked at the 25 major ones, and the consequence of not properly documenting and completing user testing is that errors could occur.
Which we agreed on. It just, with about 5 seconds to go, 60 million transaction was done. If you look at it, that's over $60 million. That's about $1 per transaction. And if I evaluate an application out there that is worth the $1 per transaction and manage that, I think we can go back and figure out how much the value of that application is. Probably that's one way we could look at it. And thank you for your consideration, sir. You gave me 27 seconds extra.
Everyone else always runs over, but never yourself. So I'm glad to give you that extra moment, Mr. Joari. Mr. Brock, please, for 5.
Thank you, Chair. To the Auditor General, we talked yesterday at Public Accounts regarding performance bonuses at PHAC, that during this boondoggle that wasted over $60 million of taxpayer funds, they wanted to reward themselves with bonuses to the tune of almost $340,000. When I asked Erin O'Gorman, president of the CBSA, she was hesitant to provide me with details. As part of your mandate, did you uncover any evidence to suggest that Ms. O'Gorman and other senior executives and other employees of the CBSA had bonused themselves while fleecing taxpayers?
So when we looked at this, we weren't looking at HR matters or compensation, so I have no comments to provide on that.
I want to focus in on 1.44 of your report that talks about you not examining any work around ethics and code of conduct because of the RCMP investigation and the internal investigation. Now, you must be aware that the internal investigation has absolutely nothing to do with the ArriveCan work that you looked at. It has everything to do with a bottler complaint that was received in November of 2022. Was that explained to you?
So the internal investigation, as my understanding, is looking into conduct and ethics of certain individuals, and I believed it extends beyond bottler, but I didn't look at all the details. So maybe I'll ask Andrew if he can add something there.
Thank you. And just as a preliminary comment here, we deliberately did not share the preliminary document with the Auditor General for the purposes of maintaining independence and objectivity, impartiality in the work.
Preliminary statement of fact?
That's right.
Okay, was that shared with you?
Yes, I've read it carefully.
Okay.
Yep.
And you did not share that with Ms. Hogan?
No.
Okay. But you would agree with me, Mr. Hayes, that it really has nothing to do with the ArriveCAN per se, but the handling of contracts related to another software company out of Montreal by the name of Bottler.
So what I would say about the preliminary document, which I'm hesitant to call a statement of fact because there are still procedural things.
This is more like it.
Our understanding is that the individuals against whom allegations have been made have not responded yet. So at this point in time, we consider that document to be preliminary and are not really relying on it as a authoritative document.
Just want to focus. This has really had nothing to do with the ArriveCAN app per se, but a secondary issue. And that secondary issue was also referred to the RCMP. So I just want to be abundantly clear with you, Ms. Hogan. In my view, there was absolutely no legal impediment for you to examine any sort of criminality or any suspicions regarding criminality because your audit on the ArriveCAN was really not the focus by the RCMP, as confirmed by the Liberal bench numerous times, that the RCMP are not investigating ArriveCAN, but rather Bottler, and the internal investigation likewise. So my question to you is very simple. Take that away. Take the RCMP away. Take the internal investigation away. You have a mandate, I believe, that if you uncover or have any suspicions regarding criminality, you must report that to the RCMP. I believe Mr. Hayes shared that with me at an earlier appearance. So take those two concepts away. Given the gross breach of trust by public officials, elements of fraud and forgery, were there any red flags, any suspicions that you would have deemed to be appropriate to report to the RCMP?
So this was a bit of an unusual situation. The way you described it is absolutely correct. If we found that there was evidence that caused us to believe that law enforcement should be involved, we would refer a matter to the RCMP. In this situation, I didn't have to turn my mind there, as the RCMP was already potentially looking at a matter related to contracting from the CBSA. So I met with the RCMP.
Yes.
And I talked to them in generalities about our findings because our report had not yet been made public, and so said to them once it was made public, if they would like to have access to our file to see our evidence, that they should send me a production order.
So at this point, you did not specifically refer any allegations to the RCMP, is that correct?
Correct, as I said, because they were already investigating a contracting
Sure,
matter.
understand. In light of what we heard today,
that
GC Strategies has been billing.
Mr. Brock, that is our time. I'm sorry. Mr. Sousa, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again for being here today and providing us some insight into some of the things that are very worrisome for all of us concerned. And Ms. Hogan, you mentioned that there was no indication of capabilities of certain contractors to do the work, yet ArriveCAN was established, substantive and very complex issues were dealt with, millions of Canadians and border crossing measures were taken. To your admission, this actually improved information exchange in order to support the process. So the indication of capability may not have been there, but certainly the results, are they positive? Did it accomplish what it intended to do?
Well, as I said in our 2021 audit, where we followed up on border measures, we did highlight that the ArriveCAN application improved the quality of the information that was collected from travelers and hence the timeliness of the government's follow-up. I should note, though, that there was still 2/3 of travelers they did not follow up with, but it was still an improvement from at the start of the pandemic.
I agree, and certainly the alternative would have been worse. But the other thing you mentioned is because it was a pandemic, because it was an urgency that was provided to the civil service to try to get this out quickly, there is no excuse for lack of reporting, lack of accountability, and the inability for you to reconcile these matters, that has to be resolved. And certainly, procurement has taken steps to, one, remove the delegation authority that you had just mentioned, enable greater e-base enablement for those contracts, and also provide for cost basis of the bid, so we have a better understanding as to why they're creating a price that they're putting forward. So that's what gives us a bit more transparency, a bit more understanding. But one other colleague there asked if this was the worst you've seen, and I don't think you were the auditor then when they were looking at the G8 Legacy Infrastructure Fund. 83 million were approved, and then $50 million were asserted to the fund that were allocated through the ministers. Again, I think the headline was no accountability, and procurement wasn't followed by the Conservatives at the time. And yet, here's an indication of something that involved elected officials in that procurement and in that disposition of funds, over 50 million to, I believe, the G8 in Huntsville and one of the ministers at the time from the Conservative benches. This did not happen here. Was any elected officials engaged in your review?
So as I said earlier on, there was no, there wasn't a good governance structure set up, and that governance structure would normally include good oversight and briefing. And while we saw evidence that the deputy minister was aware, I saw no formal documentation to see that there was a briefing done either at the political level or to the deputy head in a formal way.
Did you see decisions made on contracts by elected officials? Did you see that?
Well, we saw a lack of documentation for some of the most basic decisions being made, like why select GC strategies or
Right.
why use a sole source. So, you know, I
No, I
as I mentioned in
understand
my
there
opening
was a
statement, what we didn't find is concerning.
I understand what you didn't find. I'm just trying to see if you found any indication, which you haven't, from what I can tell in your response. But really, there is a lack of information that we should be more aware of. Do you think it's appropriate during an investigation that's being had, be it with Butler, be it with RCMP, be it on another issue, that elected officials should engage with witnesses during an investigation? Do you think that's appropriate, given that that's what you do?
I mean, it's not up to me to comment on where, what elected officials should do. I would tell you that I would not want to interfere personally with an investigation or impede in its impartiality or objectivity.
Because of the integrity of the investigation. You read the public statement of facts or the interim statement of facts. Do you think it's appropriate for that to be divulged publicly during this period of time?
I think that's a question that that has to be looked at in context. I believe, if I understand correctly, that preliminary statement of facts might have been shared with the committee by one of the individuals. If that's indeed true, that's their personal information that they can share. That's a question more for the committee than for us.
I understand, but I'm just asking for you personally, given there's an investigation, given that we have some sensitivities, given that there's a number of things that we're trying to do, if you were the investigator trying to determine this, would you find that to be an interference with your work?
Very quick answer, please.
As an investigator, I would be doing everything I can to maintain the integrity of my investigation and recognizing that I would not be the source of putting information out there. However, the other people that are being investigated have their rights as well.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. Hogan, in your report, you talk about the 167 modifications made to ArriveCAN. I believe it was 167 modifications, and that 25 of them were important, and there was documentation lacking for the 25. If I've understood correctly, either on the results, the processes, etc. But there's 150 other modifications. Do you have any information on that? Their importance, their purpose, what was done, who commissioned them? Do we have any information? There was 177, and we looked at major changes, very significant changes, and we would expect that the 25 be well done. 12 had no documentation on the user testing, In the other cases, there were 3 that were well documented. The others, well, half and half. And then we did not expand our work in terms of best practices because of the software not having been submitted. Thank you for that. To try to draw a comparison, since yesterday or day before yesterday, we keep hearing, did the application help? Whereas we have data on the economy, exchange of information getting, and the answers have been, yes, it was useful. If I were to buy a Lada and I pay $59 million for it, it's going to take me from point A to B. It will have done its job, but will I have gotten value for my money for a Lada at $59 million, which I might have bought for $12 million? I mean, that is what we're seeking answers to. We bought something, it works, it does meet its purpose, but you paid $59 million for it. Is that what we are supposed to understand? Bottom line, it's done its job, but it was really expensive.
Perhaps in Mrs. Vignola's next round. Mr. Bachrach, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To my previous question from the last round, I wonder, Ms. Hogan, if you could provide the committee with an update in response to the letter the committee sent. This was stemming from my colleague, Mr. John's motion concerning department's make or buy decisions and the Treasury Board's cost guidelines in the context of OGO's ongoing study on outsourcing. Would it be possible to receive a response from your office?
I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to, so I haven't received a letter or a notification, but we always respond to letters that we receive from the House of Commons.
Okay, perhaps we'll follow up outside of this meeting. My understanding was that a letter was supposed to have come from the committee requesting a particular audit. I wanted to raise another issue, and I think one of the most troubling revelations to come out of this larger inquiry into ArriveCAN has to do with something that's outside the scope of the audit that we're talking about today, and that is the charging of commissions by subcontractors. And we understand that those commissions can be between 15 and 30%, and you've made comments about value for money to the Canadian public. And, if there are 2 layers of subcontractors working on these projects and each of them charges a 30% commission, then all of a sudden you're in a position where, more than half the money is going to people who don't necessarily do any work on the actual project. Now, it seems like this is something that we need to get a better sense of. And I wonder, as Auditor General, if you can point this committee in a direction in terms of how we can further investigate this issue of commission charging by subcontractors who don't do any work and the cost that is imposing on the public purse.
I mean, there are many hypotheticals there. I guess what I would tell you is that this is why a competitive process is really important. Having competition, having many vendors bid for the same work enhances the opportunity to reduce the price and to guarantee that the Government of Canada gets the best value for money. Right now, contracts and subcontracts are allowed in the procurement vehicles for the Government of Canada. What I would expect to see is that the essential requirements that are in the main contract are then carried through to the subcontract, and it would be the responsibility of the public service to make sure that that happens. So, for example, that security clearances be carried through to subcontractors, that skills be carried through, but that monitoring rests again with the public service.
Thanks very much.
So, in your view,
no, I'm sorry that
sorry,
is our
Mr.
time.
Chair. Thank
Mrs.
you very much.
Bach, please.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Madam Auditor General, notwithstanding the glaring mismanagement that you have pointed out, and the gross waste of taxpayers' money. I think we continue to be deeply concerned with what we believe may be corruption within the department when it comes to the awarding of contracts. In the course of our study of ArriveCan, and I'll perhaps follow up on what my colleague Mr. Bacharach was talking about or questioning you about, we have had extensive issues with scrutinizing subcontractors. We know that we do not have the ability to scrutinize them in the same way that we do contractors. We have also learned from departments that the scrutiny of these subcontractors is far less strenuous than that of contractors. And in paragraph 1.53 of your report, and I'm going to quote what you mentioned. You mentioned in point 153, we also found a situation where the agency reached out to a firm, one that did not have a contract with the agency, to complete work on ArriveCan. A few days later, the firm's resources were added to a task authorization under a contract with GC Strategies. This is concerning. It would seem like a ploy to allow GC Strategies to get a cut for the work done by this new resource by putting them on a task authorization underneath GC Strategies and reduce oversight. Can you tell us what is the name of the firm you referenced in this paragraph?
I'm going to have to look for someone else for that answer. Hold on. I'll have to look in the file. We'll have to look in our audit file, and we can get back to the committee on that.
Okay, I would also ask if you could provide us with the information that whether or not this company becoming a subcontractor for GC Strategies, we received value for money of their work. And again, would it have been cheaper for CBSA to contract that firm directly rather than making them a subcontractor to GC Strategies?
I mean, as we noted in that paragraph that you started quoting, the last few sentences do state that it was unclear why there wasn't a contract entered into directly by the Canada Border Services Agency, and as a result, it's likely that the CBSA paid more for those resources than they should have if they had contracted directly with the vendor.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, thank you. I'm just going to go back to your mandate as the Auditor General. I had the privilege of working with you on public accounts in the role as chair of that committee, and understand that I believe your role is to take a look at the processes, rules, policies that a department puts in place to conduct their work, and that you audit those processes, policies, and rules. I guess what I'm asking you to comment in is I think we really do need to delineate the difference between the responsibility to know, which would be the minister's responsibility to know, and the responsibility to act, which would be the deputy head's responsibility to act, or those that fall within the organization underneath them. Do you believe that ministers ought to have known what was happening in their departments during the pandemic? Perhaps they weren't responsible for what happened, but did they have a responsibility to know?
In my view, that's a matter that a minister and a deputy minister should be having a conversation about and agree on what matters briefings should occur. I think every department and every minister might have a different view or different expectation, and that should be outlined and clear between the deputy head and the minister.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Kusmirchuk, please.
Thank you, Chair. And in your report, Ms. Hogan, you talk about value for money. And the 3 pillars of value for money are minimizing consideration of economy, so minimizing cost, efficiency, maximizing output, and effectiveness, fully attaining the intended results. And your findings demonstrate to us that the conditions were not there for Canadians to have trust or confidence that Canadians were receiving maximum value for money. We need, moving forward, or what we didn't have strong record keeping, as you mentioned. Strong oversight was lacking. You recommended reducing dependence on outsourced IT specialists over time, especially over time. And you recommended more competition. Is that sort of in a nutshell what the report is saying? That the conditions were not there for Canadians to be confident that they were maximizing value for money in this instance?
I think in this instance, the resources weren't available at the beginning of the pandemic, and that's why outsourcing was a reasonable decision. There are times when turning to a vendor makes a lot of sense. Long-term dependency shouldn't be there. We concluded that the app was effective, as I mentioned in 2021, but it was not efficient or done with due regard for value for money. The things that were missing were basic elements that traditionally we see in the public service. Many of my recommendations are what I would say are very obvious recommendations, which is unlike us to issue such obvious recommendations. The policies exist, the rules exist, the good practices are typically followed, and we would have expected to see that happen here, even though it was an emergency.
No, I completely understand, and I think you have full agreement with those around the table here. The major significant shortcomings that we saw when it comes to, again, record keeping, oversight, competition, and again, just simply the conditions were not there to make sure that Canadians could get fair value for money. I did want to talk about effectiveness for a second, and I do have a unique vantage point as an MP in a border community. The ArriveCAN was very important in our community to guarantee the free flow of goods across that border. Specifically across the Ambassador Bridge, there's $400 million of goods that cross the border on the Ambassador Bridge every single day. About a third of all two-way traffic along the U.S.-Canada border goes through that crossing. We're talking about 1.4 million trucks per year, or 10,000 trucks daily. 10,000 trucks daily. These are trucks that carry everything from car parts that allow our factories to operate and folks to go to work. It includes medicines for our hospitals, for healthcare, including vaccines. It includes food, basic vital resources for our communities. And so the ArriveCAN allowed the free movement of goods. You yourself mentioned that had there been a paper-based system, it probably would have ground that traffic to a halt on that border. So this allowed, during the pandemic, for the free flow of goods. Has that been taken into consideration in your analysis of value for money for Canadians? Again, we're talking about over $1 billion worth of trade every single year that goes across that border, that the ArriveCAN Act allowed to seamlessly cross during the height of the pandemic.
So I would tell you that this was effective in that it allowed border officers to be able to physically distance. It improved the quality of information that was collected from travelers and sped up the process at the border. I would tell you that for those 10,000 individuals who were told to incorrectly quarantine, they probably don't agree that it was effective. But even though that was effective, it doesn't mean you should pay more than you should have for an app. And so there's a difference between being effective and getting good value for money.
But was it effective in terms of allowing, again, that seamless movement of goods? Again, $140 billion worth of goods across that border crossing every year. Was it important to maintain that free flow of, again, car parts, vaccines, medicine, food across the border?
So I can't really comment on that. When we were looking at the border measures, it was around the health measures that were being posed at the border, and could the ArriveCan sped up the ability to verify that individuals entering the country were vaccinated, had done a COVID test, and then it also improved the ability of the Public Health Agency to follow up with those who should be quarantining to confirm that it was happening or not. We didn't look at whether or not, how the border was managed, whether it impacted the flow of goods in or out. So our audit did not go that far in 2021.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kusmirchuk. Mrs. Kusi, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Madam Auditor General, in Section 1.67, you state that the CBSA approved timesheets with no work details, which means it's highly contractors were being paid for completing no work. Who were the contractors that submitted these blank timesheets?
Oh, so that paragraph doesn't speak about blank timesheets. What was missing on the timesheets was the project that it might relate to, or the work that was accomplished. There would have been an individual's name and the hours worked, but what was missing often was the details to allow you to know which IT project it went to, which contract or task authorization it related to, and that's just not good financial record keeping. It's not good controls or practices to validate that the government's received what it's paying for what it actually received.
Thank you. My colleagues across the aisle talk continuously about the security of the application and the use of the application. But in Section 1.74, you state that GC Strategies used 2 resources to check the cyber security of ArriveCan and did not ensure that these resources had the adequate security clearances, correct?
Yeah, we did find that individuals who did some of the security testing did not have the security clearances that were required by the contract. However, that security testing was done in a test environment. So it still raises a concern because a person could potentially be identifying vulnerabilities of the application, but they did not have access to individuals' data as it was in a test environment.
Are there many levels of the CBSA and PSPC that handle security checks to ensure the integrity and security of Canada's private information?
So I mean, we didn't look at who issues security clearances here. What we were looking at was that a task authorization required that an individual doing work needed to have a certain level of security clearance, and we would have expected that the Canada Border Service Agency would have ensured that those carrying out the work had the requirements that have been outlined in the task authorization, and that's not what happened here.
How many points of failure occurred to allow this to happen? Would there be, in a process, would there be certain security checkpoints that you would audit in terms of following through a process? Would you be able to determine the number of points where this failed?
I think that's a difficult question. I guess it would start off with, was the security requirement checklist done before a task authorization or a contract was put forth? Once you set out the requirements in that task authorization, someone should have ensured that the resources that were proposed by the vendor met those requirements, and then you would have had to check a second time when the invoice came in that it was the actual individual. So there could be many points where this could have been flagged. But in this instance, I don't know the details as to where that failure might have occurred. But the fact remained that individuals who didn't have clearance carried out the work, and they shouldn't have.
Since GC Strategies had 2 examples of not properly vetting their resources and following the property security protocols, do you think that perhaps this should require further review, or perhaps their work across other departments, the $250 million, as we learned today, those security clearances, those who worked on these GC Strategies projects, should that perhaps be under further review after correlating the revelations that were found within your report and then the quantity of work completed by GC Strategies across government that we learned about today?
In our report, we made a recommendation that all resources, including contractors and subcontractors, should have valid security clearances on the file prior to starting any work. And it's important that it's before they start work. regardless of who the contractor is, and in this case, GC Strategies, that should be happening. So wherever this contractor is working, we would expect that that the departments or agencies are looking to make sure valid security clearances are in place before work is started.
I agree entirely with this recommendation, and further to the investigation of the RCMP, Bottler AI also made allegations that were reported in October of 2023 that stated they were not given the property security clearances before they began their work back in 2020. So do all of these examples bring concern of a systematic problem for you across government, or certainly across the agency, regarding security clearances?
I mean, it's hard to speak across the government since we really focused in here on ArriveCAN, but it is a concern that if there's a requirement that an individual have a security clearance and that the person managing that contract didn't make sure that happened, that is a concern because there's valid reasons for having security clearances in place, and that's why we issued the recommendation. It does concern us.
Thank you.
Done at Foreign Affairs, it was quite a process, top secret. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. Mr. Shawari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, if you allow me, I'm going to make a comment and then I resume my line of questioning. And the comment is to build on what my colleague, MP Kuzmirchuk, was talking about. So I'd like to put to Canadian and all of our colleagues the following. If there was an e-commerce application who had 18 million users and processed 60 million transactions and facilitated over billions of dollars of monetary transaction, what would its valuation be today in our market? There's a big difference between the cost of developing an application in new code and what is valued at. And I leave it as that. If you're interested, go do a little bit of research to understand what the valuation of such an application it is. Thank you for indulging. Madam Hogan, back to you. You talked about the deputy head being accountable and the executive director being responsible. In consulting, we have a concept that's called RACI: responsible, accountable, consult, inform. That's what RACI stands for. So you said by the virtue that the executive director has signed that authorization requisition, that individual is both responsible as well as accountable. So I'm finding a conflict, and I'm hoping that you would be able to clarify. In one hand, on the accountability goes to the highest level, and you identify deputy head. On the other hand, the responsibility is that. Can you help me clarify that? Who's ultimately accountable and who was responsible?
So the origin of that statement about deputy head accountability is rooted in the Financial Administration Act that makes it clear that deputy ministers, in this case the president of the agency, are the accounting officers for the departments or agencies for which they're responsible. They are answerable to Parliament for all of the activities of their organization.
Ultimately, is the deputy head. Is that fair? Okay. Thank you on that. Now, there was you indicated that there were lack of transparency or lack of document in determining how many of the department officials attended these events, because you're saying that there were emails, and the emails requested the officials to attend these social events. Is there an indication how many of those were, and how many of those indicated? Was it 100? Was it 50? Was it 2? Was it 1? How many of the employees, as any indication, is that they attended those?
So we were talking about invitations that we saw that vendors sent to individuals linked to ArriveCAN. So I think I have to start with that it is linked to ArriveCAN. We didn't do a bigger, broader search across the Canada Border Services Agency. In this instance, we saw 3 to 4 vendors who sent invitations to individuals in the IT branch.
Was that 10, 20, 100?
As I said, I don't have a comprehensive list, but I
Okay.
can tell you there was 3 or 4 vendors who invited at least 5 Canada Border Services employees. There was another half a dozen individuals on those emails as well that because we couldn't see the extensions, we were not exactly sure if they were Canada Border Service employees or other.
The level that these 5 individuals from CBSA were
It would go
invited.
from the assistant deputy minister down to the working level.
Okay. Okay. And you don't know how many times the invite was there? Is it five times? No, we
I
don't.
do not know who attended, and I do not know that any of them, in accordance with the code of conduct of the agency, reported this to their supervisor.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Mr. Chair, you gave me 27 seconds. I'm going to give you back 27 seconds.
Thanks very much. We're going to switch over to Mrs. Vignola. A.G. Hogan and Mr. Hayes, we're just distributing to you just a letter you wrote to us. I think that's what Mr. Bachrach was referring to. So I wanted you to have it in case he brings it up in his intervention. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'm not an auditor general. I don't plan to become one. This is, I feel passionate about this. We read through all this and think about government transparency and all the information we can see. To do your study, you did the analysis of, documentation. For what period? The period we covered was January 2019 to 31 January 2023. That was the period that we examined the documentation for. Then, of course, you do work subsequently, discussions, and so forth after that end date. I can compile a list of data. I haven't finished my own analysis. Is it commonplace that a company in a single day receive up to 3 contracts for contractors for a total of $1 million? 3 different contracts? Is that commonplace? Is that a genuine question? Because I find that shocking. Well, there are regulations. So there are regulations whereby you shouldn't divide certain contracts because of thresholds and requirements. So it's difficult to say if it's commonplace or customary, if it's 3 very different separate contracts for 3 very different matters that are in no way connected. But there is a great deal of regulation governing this on contract splitting. You have to be compliant with procedures in this regard. Yes, it helps me with my own research because I've noticed contracts. The example I'm interested in particularly is 3 contracts the same day for the exact same type of services in the same department or agency organization, as you will. And that's why I asked my question, because I'm very surprised. So thank you for shedding light on that for my own personal research. As to, the why, I mean, yes, this is what we would look into.
Go ahead, please, for 2.5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll return to my previous question regarding the letter sent from the committee. So just to refresh folks' memory, on October 3rd, 2022, my colleague, Mr. Johns, moved the following motion: that in the context of its study of outsourcing of contracts, the committee write to the Auditor General of Canada to recommend an audit of the implementation of the Treasury Board's Guide to Cost Estimating by departments in relation to make or buy decisions and oversight of the Treasury Board with respect to the same. Now, in November, Ms. Hogan, your office wrote to the committee and confirmed a receipt of the letter and said that you would keep those topics in mind when you audited the ArriveCan app. And I would just note that the context of the motion that was passed by the committee deals with the study on outsourcing that the committee is undertaking. And that study has expanded to include the contracting out to the big six consulting companies. And so I think, you know, as much as you did touch on these topics in the context of the ArriveCan app, the larger question of whether these policies are being upheld across government procurement is still an outstanding question. And so I'll ask again whether your office is willing to undertake an audit on the Treasury Board's Guide to Cost Estimating and make or buy decisions and the oversight of the Treasury Board in the context of government outsourcing to the big six consulting companies. I just think it's a question that's very much in the public interest. I'm keen to hear what your office's response is now that the ArriveCan audit is done.
So I apologize to the person that puts on the light here. I kept pressing it off when they were putting it on.
I've done that myself.
So in response to this letter, we did signal that we were going to be doing an audit of ArriveCan and that we were going to be determining the scope. This was not included in the scope for the ArriveCan audit. However, we covered it in a different way in our audit of modernization of information technology systems that was tabled in the fall. We did talk about the process that and the guidance that Treasury Board has to help departments make decisions around IT systems. Not exactly about make or buy decisions, but to a certain degree that that is going to be covered in our future audit that we will be tabling, we expect, in May. The point that I'm making here is simply that while it's not covered in the ArriveCan audit, you can find some helpful information in our audit that we tabled in the fall.
Right. If I may, Mr. Chair, it feels
Really
like
quick,
there
please.
are little tidbits here and there, but what the committee was after was a specific audit on the topic of make or buy decisions and the Treasury Board's guidelines, particularly with reference to the big six consulting companies, which are getting hundreds of millions, if not more, in government contracts, many of them granted non-competitively. And there's a real question there
Gotta
of
wrap
whether
up,
the
Mr.
public is getting
Bachrach. We're
value
way
for its
past
money.
time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Brock, please, and then Mr. Souza, please.
Back to you, Auditor General. In light of the shocking revelations revealed today that GC Strategies has received $250 million under the Justin Trudeau government for a myriad of contracts, probably very similar in nature to the ArriveCan scandal, does that in and of itself heighten your suspicions with respect to GC Strategies? And if it does that heighten enough to notify the RCMP to expand their investigation to ArriveCan specifically?
I mean, as I said previously, I've spoken to the RCMP and we'll be happy to open our file should they issue a formal request and they can see the documentation and the evidence that we have around our audit.
Okay. And when you had those discussions with the RCMP, they never closed off that possibility. They didn't say to you, for instance, I'm sorry, Auditor General, we're not interested, anything like that?
No, I followed up the meeting with a letter on January 26th and I have not heard from them since.
Thank you. Did ever an opportunity present itself where President O'Gorman confirmed with you any suspensions of any other CBS employees as a result of your findings?
We are not aware of any suspensions. We know that the two individuals who have been discussed at this committee previously have been suspended by their organizations, but we're not aware of any within CBSA.
Thank you. Were you aware as well that there's an allegation that Min Doan, the vice president of the CBSA, had deleted and or mysteriously had 4 years worth of emails corrupted? Were you aware of that fact?
Yes, we are aware of that.
Okay. And you'd agree with me, perhaps you, Mr. Hayes, with your legal background, that in of itself could constitute an obstruction of justice?
When information is missing, there's always concerns about why. In the case of our audit, we were able to obtain information emails that Mr. Doan had sent to and from people that were relevant to our audit work. So we
Certainly not all 4 years worth.
We got a considerable amount of emails. We can't say that that is completely comprehensive
Right.
because there are emails that would be
Okay.
deleted along the way.
Thank you. To Mr. Hanoush, is it correct that you interviewed Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano literally within a few weeks of the release of the report?
Yes, we interviewed them in January.
Right. And when you interviewed both Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano, was the report of the Auditor General substantially completed?
We were still in the process of completing the report.
Did any of the evidence that you received either orally or with documentation produced to you by both individuals, did that in any way factor in the ultimate report that you have shared with Canadians?
What was provided to us orally was confirmed with the two individuals when we interviewed them. And in terms of the materials provided, those were considered in the context of all of the other information we had in our files.
Were you also informed that Kelly Belanger of the CBSA was responsible for project management during the course of the ArriveScan creation?
I don't recall specifically that.
Were you informed by Mr. McDonald or Mr. Utano that she also was rewarded with a non-advertised promotion? No?
I'm not aware.
Okay. Did you interview the two partners at Bottler AI?
We did, yes.
You did? Yes? And did you ever receive either from Bottler or from President O'Gorman or anyone else from the CBSA for that matter, the full report regarding the misconduct that they alleged in the fall of 2022? Did you receive a copy of that?
Can we just clarify, are you talking about the internal
Bottler
investigation
complaint.
or the Bottler complaint?
Bottler complaint.
The team did receive a copy of the Bottler
Okay.
complaint, yes.
And was it complete? It wasn't redacted in any way?
It was not redacted, no.
Okay. Besides the two individuals who are currently suspended without pay, McDonald and Utano, were there any other allegations of misconduct with any other CBS employee as contained in that report?
I would have to go back to the report at this point. We read that
Okay,
months ago.
would you share, can you go back to the report and share with this committee details of any other allegations of any other individual other than McDonald and Utano, please? Within 15 days?
I'm not sure if we're able to do that. That would be a request probably best made to the agency.
Thank you. My time is up.
Mr. Sousa, please.
Thank you. So a line of questioning has just occurred relevant to an investigation that's ongoing. A line of questions has just occurred with information and details that are privy to people involved in that investigation. So it appears to me that information has been released and has been it's been transferred over for others to press. And this is wherein lies the problem. Therein lies the problem of this, the integrity of the investigation itself. Do you feel it's appropriate, Mr. Hanoush? You've been interviewing, you've been meeting with the witnesses, you've had some discussions with the individuals involved, both at Bottler and in regards to GC strategies, correct? You just confirmed that you've had those discussions.
Can you repeat the question? My apologies.
You have confirmed that you have had discussions with the two witnesses in the statement of fact, and that you've had discussions with the one from the two founders of Bottler.
Yes, I can confirm that.
Right. And now there's this, and we're all concerned about obstruction. We're concerned about misuse of authority. We're concerned about people taking advantage of their privilege in order to contract with others. And if there's some collusion, if there's some sort of wrongdoing, we want to get to the bottom of it. RCMP were given notice by the government relative to this very issue. The government, is that not correct? Who provided the RCMP with the initial request to investigate?
The Canada Border Services Agency informed the RCMP, and just to be clear, we made a deliberate decision to not duplicate or compromise other investigations.
You made a deliberate decision not to?
Yes.
And why was that? because you didn't want to compromise the investigation, I think is what you just said.
Ultimately, we did not want to duplicate work that was being done by other organizations, and we did not want to compromise what work was going on.
Absolutely, and rightly so. So when government officials and government elected officials, no less, who are now trying to get into their video conferences and displays and trying to go after and we want the truth, we absolutely want to get to the bottom of this. But is it necessary in Canada? We're not North Korea. The government doesn't control the police. The government is not in charge of forcing them to investigate or not. Is the RCMP, in your opinion, Auditor General, in your opinion, is the RCMP aware of the circumstances before us in this committee, given what they are doing with Bottler?
I think it's fair to say that that there's a lot of attention on what is happening both publicly and behind the scenes in terms of the investigation that the CBSA is conducting. I would imagine that the RCMP is watching that. We are not in a position to comment on what the RCMP.
And rightly so. Nor should a committee, nor should elected officials. The RCMP have it within their purview to figure out if there's criminal activity at play. And this is where some are presupposing these are criminals. That hasn't been decided. The investigation has not been completed, and we need that investigation as taxpayers, as officials in government, those that are in the bureaucracy and in civil service. We all want to make certain that people are abiding by the law. And if they are not abiding by the law after the investigation is complete and determined, be it by the RCMP or the internal investigation, then consequences will occur. By having officials or elected members playing, I don't know what they're playing with others out there, does that prejudice the outcome? And is it necessary to ask the RCMP to do something which they themselves will determine?
Our role as an independent agent of Parliament is to support the work of Parliament. We made a deliberate decision not to duplicate work that was happening in other places, but it's not for us to describe.
Does the RCMP require our instruction, is my point. Can they not proceed without anyone instructing them to do so? Are they independent to do the work that they're there to do?
My understanding is the RCMP is an independent organization. However, I would just reiterate that it's not for us to tell the RCMP what to do. It's not for us to tell Parliament what to do.
Is it up to elected officials to tell the RCMP what to do?
Mr. Sousa.
Oh, you let him go on. I want that answer. Are elected officials entitled to tell the RCMP what to do?
You have a clock as well, and I allowed several of your colleagues to go a bit long, as opposed to the others. That is our time. A.G. Hogan, Mr. Hayes, Mr. Anus, and Ms. Dupree. Oh, I'm sorry.
If
yes,
I may, Mr.
I will.
Chair? If I may, Mr. Chair, an
Yeah.
honourable member asked a question before around paragraph 53. Could I provide the response
Sure.
to the committee?
We
So
will
you asked about
always welcome responses
you.
from you. You don't have to ask.
Thank you. So I believe it was
And
Ms.
yeah,
Block.
sorry,
who
and I
asked,
will. Are you going to tell us
Yeah,
now
can
or
I
in
do it
writing?
right now?
Oh, sure.
instead
Yeah,
of
and
doing it
I'll
in
get you in 2 seconds, Miss Kusi.
Take 2
Please go
seconds.
ahead.
It was about paragraph 53. I believe it was Ms. Block who asked the name of the vendor, and it was KPMG.
KPMG. Yikes. Yes, I'll get you, Miss Kusi, but I just want to say thank you again. Miss Dupree, I'm sorry you weren't able to join us, join in the conversation. Always a pleasure having you with us. We look forward to seeing you again, but perhaps after a bit more of a break. So thanks. Colleagues, we'll go. I'm just going to hear from Mrs. Kusi, then we'll suspend as we have to switch over. Mr. Bachrach, you're going to have to leave and come back into a new Zoom, but just hang on right now. Mrs. Kusi, you have something for us,
Yes,
please?
I had a matter of hand motion, please.
Okay, I'm sorry. Mrs. Block, could you? Colleagues? Sorry, I'm going to, if you wish to head out while we, go ahead, Mrs. Kusi. Thanks again, Mrs. Kusi.
Okay,
Sorry.
you're sure? It's a,
Yes, please go ahead.
okay, all right, I know, we want to get to in camera here and get home, for those of us who are so fortunate perhaps to have our Valentines here. I'm not one of them. But I have had 4 chocolates and a cupcake, so it's been a good day. Pardon me, Mr. Chair, I'll get serious again here. So we have seen now the evolution of the involvement of GC Strategies and the implication of GC Strategies, not only in the Bottler GC Strategies investigation, but also their implication in ArriveCan. And it started out initially that we believe that they were involved in ArriveCan for $11 million. This is the number that we believed on all sides of the House, that my colleagues and I brought up many times within the House. And then we find out that it's actually $19 million, thanks to the good work of the Auditor General, which we're all, of course, very grateful for this report. And then we find out today that it actually could be more than the $19 million, given that the incomplete paperwork could result in a number that is greater than 19 million. And then we find out, Mr. Chair, due to reports within the media today, that GC Strategies has received since 2015 $250 million in contracts across this government. And I think that individuals on all sides of the House are incredibly concerned as to the processes which GC Strategies followed, and are certainly concerned to get to the bottom of how such a large amount of contracting was awarded to a firm which we have seen actually does none of the work, actually works as a headhunting firm, as my NDP colleague referred to. And I really think that this behooves a greater investigation and a greater evaluation by a body bigger than this committee. It's very hard to dispute that, given the increasing allegations which I've mentioned here today. And so I present, Mr. Chair, this following motion: that in light of new reports that GC Strategies has received $258 million since 2015 in government contracts, including 46 sole source contracts, the committee call on the Auditor General of Canada to conduct a performance audit on a priority basis of all payments to GC Strategies and its contracts with the Government of Canada, including all departments, agencies, and Crown corporations, including all subcontracts which GC Strategies has awarded under those contracts, and that the committee report these findings to the House. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thanks. I understand from our clerk, this has been sent out an hour ago. Mr. Sousa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on this side of the House, we also want to get down to the bottom of these issues and these items. And I'd like to propose an amendment. And it would be as follows, if I may, that in light of the new reports by GC Strat...
Sorry, can I interrupt? Do you have it written down?
I do have it written down, and I can share it.
Yeah, if you want to share it with the clerk while you're reading it.
Yeah, can someone
Sorry, as soon as you finish reading. Sure. Okay. Thanks, Mr. Sousa.
And so it's in keeping with the proposal, and it would read as follows: that in light of the new reports that GC Strategies has received millions of dollars in government contracts, including a number of sole source contracts. So I'm removing the 258, I'm removing since 2005, or removing the number of 46. It could be a number of them. That the committee request the Auditor General of Canada to conduct a performance audit on a priority basis of all payments to GC Strategies, including and specifically with Christian Firth and or his business partner Darren Anthony, before the founding of GC Strategies, and all contracts with Government of Canada, including all departments, agencies, and Crown corporations, including all subcontracts with GC Strategies, and the before mentioned have been awarded under those contracts. And then I remove the rest of it. So I say go after all of it.
Okay. Are you sending it out, or is
it's being sent to you guys right now?
Okay. Thanks. We'll start, Mrs. Vignola, on the amendment, please.
I'll just wait for my esteemed colleagues to put on their listening devices. Well, one or the other. proposals works for me, because I think there's one thing that we have to be assured of. If there is something crooked, because we are not a court of law, but if something is not right, we have to identify it to enhance processes, not to accuse. We're not a court, and we're certainly not a people's court. And the history teacher in me tells me that, people's courts have led to burning thousands of women in our history. So let's avoid that. We are here to analyze processes, make suggestions, recommendations to enhance these processes. So the amendment can work for me, although it's not as precise as what Ms. Kuzi has proposed. But the amendment works for me, even if it is less specific, because it leaves the door open to going further than the 258 million, or the less, or go less far, or if there's more contracts than X or fewer contracts. It opens the door to go into greater depth. On the other hand, the aspect that concerns me is delaying the report to the House. I mean, by reporting to the House, we would be able to have the House, assess what we are recommending and what we have observed. And that aspect I find less suitable. So I apologize to the interpreters for that. Now, if colleagues authorize me, I would I'd make a friendly amendment where we would leave the last sentence concerning the report to the House. Should I repeat? But teachers are used to repeating.
In French as well, so we can't distribute it, but we got it. Oh, you just got it. Wonderful. So we'll just send it out.
Alors, ce que je suggère, un amendement.
What I suggest is a friendly amendment, given the explanations I gave. I would suggest a friendly amendment where we leave the part where we would report to the House, so that we can share with the House our observations and comments and recommendations concerning what stems from the report. Thank you.
On the sub-amendment from Mrs. Vignola's.
Oh, did you just move that as a sub-amendment?
To, remove report to the House.
Okay. I want to speak in support of Ms. Vignola's sub-amendment. I think there are a few things we have to parse out about what Mr. Sousa is doing here, because I think for those fans of Dr. Dolittle, we see a little bit of push me, pull you appearing to happen at the same time here. And I think the reality is we have seen efforts by the government to limit the investigation into this issue. They opposed the initial motion calling for the audit of ArriveCan. They tried to prevent, and in fact did prevent, the internal investigator from testifying. They have tried to suggest that we shouldn't be exploring this issue until an internal investigation is complete, but that internal investigation is itself marred by significant risk of interference, given that the internal investigator reports within the existing structure of CBSA. CBSA cannot be trusted to investigate itself. We've had an excellent report from the Auditor General. We've had an excellent report from the Procurement Commissioner, and the work of this committee must continue. And I think further work is required by the Auditor General on the issue of other contracts involving GC Strategies. And so there are some aspects of the amendment that just seem sort of odd to me. Like why would you take out the numbers? It's been reported. It's not as if it's a secret. But on the specific issue of the sub amendment, I think it's a good sub amendment because we are not supportive of efforts to bury this issue, bury this conversation. It's the job of committees to report to the House. This is a serious issue, and we think the work of the committee should be reported to the House. So I hope we can adopt the sub amendment and then continue going forward.
So is anyone on Mrs. Bignola's sub amendment? Mr. Kuzmicek and Mr. Sousa?
Could we just suspend for 1 minute, please? Just for to be able to discuss, because there's been an amendment and a sub amendment.
Yeah, sure.
On the floor.
If we can keep it quick, thanks. We're suspended. I think Mr. Generous has the floor.
Okay, Chair, so I just want to clarify the sub-amendment we're talking about, because I think there's some ambiguity around the language of, and that the committee report these findings to the House. I think maybe it would make sense for it to say, and the committee report this to the House. So I don't know if that is what the sub-amendment was, or if that's a new sub-amendment. But an Auditor General's report goes to the House. But what is important here is that when a committee makes a request for an audit, that does not carry nearly the same weight as when the House makes a request for the audit. So I think we do need to report this request to the House in order to ensure that the request for the audit actually comes from the House as a whole. Now, that can be done quickly, but it does require that reporting to the House. So I don't know if I can have a friendly clarification of the sub.
We would
or
have
if we
a
need
sub. I think it might be easier just to have a vote and vote it down and then reintroduce, go back to the amendment and introduce a proper, so to speak, sub-amendment, as opposed to sub-amending the sub-amendment to the amendment to the motion.
Alors, si je comprends bien, vous me demandez.
So if I've understood correctly,
Back to Mr. Sousa after Mr. Generous. Mr. Backrack, and then we'll come back to you, Mrs. Vignola.
Yeah, thanks, Miss. On the topic of reporting to the House, I think, the best time to have a fulsome debate in the House on this topic is after we receive the report from the audit that we're requesting. And so, I think reporting the motion to the House doesn't seem to be necessary. What we really want to get out of this is we want the Auditor General to conduct an audit into the items that are listed in the motion. And, I think given the seriousness of the allegations and the information that's been uncovered to date, I would hope that the Auditor General would take that request very seriously. I certainly support the content of the motion and the direction that this is headed in. However, I don't think having a debate in the House prior to the completion of the audit is well considered or necessary at this point.
Thanks, and I'll just chime in quickly to address that, Mr. Backrack. It's more the issue, the committee cannot, even with a motion, compel the AG to do the report. The idea is if it goes to the House can ask the AG to do it, but we cannot. So I think that is the, I'm going to assume that is the intent behind reporting to the House. It's Mr. Sousa, and then back to Mrs. Vignola.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So in regards to the sub-amendment, it's the original amendment by the Conservatives. So it's their own wording that we're bringing back. And notwithstanding what I just heard, I don't understand that aspect, but we're prepared to support your friendly amendment to the amendments, right? And proceed.
Yeah, Mr. Generous, and then we'll see if they're still on the speaking list. Go ahead, Mr. Generous. Mr. Backrack,
okay,
sorry, give me a sec. Mr. Backrack, your hand is up. Did you wish to speak again, or
well, just
on
the
sub-amendment?
On the sub-amendment to put back in the reporting to the House, is that correct?
Mrs. Vignola's sub-amendment. Yes, basically that. Yes.
Yes, and I guess my understanding of it differs.
Sorry, I'm just asking if your hand's up or not.
It is up, yes.
Okay, so we'll get to you after Mr. Generous.
Okay, so just for procedural simplicity, I think the simplest thing to do, if there's a desire to do this, is to adopt Ms. Vignola's sub-amendment, but then I would like to propose another sub-amendment which might be adopted or rejected, but it seems that just allows us to move forward. So is there agreement to adopt Ms. Vignola's?
Got Mr. Backrack on the speaking order, and then perhaps we can get to adopt our vote on Mrs. Vignola's sub-amendment. Then go ahead, Mr. Backrack.
As I was saying, Mr. Chair, I support the idea of the House asking the Auditor General to conduct an audit. What I don't support necessarily is us trying to instigate a debate in the House prior to the results of that audit being tabled, because I think it's really the results of that audit that are going to be important to inform our debate. And I would prefer that we focus on urging the Auditor General to conduct the audit. So maybe there's a misinterpretation on my part in terms of what that clause of the motion aims to do. Usually, when we see these sort of things, it's the intention is to trigger a concurrence debate in the House. And if the intention is actually to get the House to request the audit of the Auditor General, I would support that fully. Thank you.
I think that is the intent. Can we get to a vote on Mrs. Vignola's sub-amendment, and then we can get back to Mr. Sousa's amendment? Right. Do we need to vote? No, I think we're in agreement.
Yeah.
Agreed. On Mrs. Vignola's sub-amendment?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. We are back to Mr. Sousa's amended amendment. Mr. Genuis.
Okay. So now that we're back on the amendment and we have the language in and that the committee report these findings to the House, I do think we need a little bit of clarity about what we mean by what we're reporting. Because there is a bit of a constraint, because obviously Auditor General's reports, when they are complete, they are tabled in the House. So I think what we mean to do is that we report the request for the audit to the House, to advise the House of our desire for that audit. So I would just propose that we add the words "this request" and, so those three words, "this request" and, ahead of these findings. So it would simply say, and that the committee report this request and these findings to the House. I think that just clarifies what we mean.
Okay, we're
here.
back. Great. So we're back to a sub-amendment. I'm going to have the clerk read back the proposed Mr. Sousa's now amended motion with our amendment with Mr. Genuis's sub-amendment. So the clerk is going to read it back. I'll have him read it back in both languages, colleagues.
Okay, so the motion as amended with the sub-amendment reads that in light of new reports that GC Strategies and other companies incorporated by the co-founders has received millions of dollars in government contracts, including a number of sole-sourced contracts, the committee, the auditor, request the Auditor General of Canada to conduct a performance audit on a priority basis of all payments to GC Strategies and other companies incorporated by the co-founders, and all contracts with the Government of Canada, including all departments, agencies, and Crown corporations, including all subcontracts which GC Strategies and the before mentioned have been awarded under those contracts, and that this request and these findings be reported to the House.
Pardon me for jumping in, but and that the committee report this request and these findings to the House.
That's
correct?
your sub-amendment.
My sub-amendment is to add those three words, but that's what the revised line would read. Just
could we? Sorry, could you do it en français for Mrs. Vignola as well?
Okay.
Okay. Just listen into the translation, make sure.
En français, ce serait que le rapport fasse rapport de cette
Ouais. Et en français pour Madame Vignola, que à la lumière
that in light of the new reports that GC Strategies and other companies
La dernière phrase se lira donc.
So the last sentence, which is, and that the committee report this request and findings to the House.
I'm starting the speaking list on Mr. Genoves's sub-amendment to Mr. Sousa's amendment. I see Mr. Backrack.
Yes, Mr. Chair, to that point, I can support reporting the findings to the House, although it does seem redundant given that the Auditor General's report would also be tabled in the House. I'm not sure the utility of reporting the request to the House, so I won't be supporting the sub-amendment.
Thank you, Chair. It's very simple. The House, and I think the Chair already spoke to this, the House needs to make the request in order for it to actually be assured of happening. Parliamentary committees exercise important authority, but it's delegated authority from the House. And the Auditor General has been clear about this in the past, that if a committee asks for an audit, okay, maybe. I mean, if a private citizen writes to the Auditor General and asks for an audit, okay, maybe. If the House asks for an audit, collectively, it means something different. So, look, this doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process in the House. I would suggest, Mr. Backrack, that once this is reported, you or someone else seek the unanimous agreement of the House to deem it concurred in right away. And I don't think anybody will have any excuse for saying no, and then it will be done. So my appeal would be let's send the request in so that the House can do it, and let's do it quickly, decisively. No need for debate, provided that process works.
Committee to do it. No. No, I don't.
I can support that, Mr. Chair.
It was Mr. Genoves's sub-amendment to your amendment. Do you want me to have it just read back one more time? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, just bear with us. I'll have the clerk read back just one more time.
Okay, so the motion will read that in light of new reports that GC Strategies has and other companies incorporated by the co-founders has received millions of dollars in government contracts, including a number of sole source contracts, the committee, the Auditor General of Canada, the committee request the Auditor General of Canada to conduct a performance audit on a priority basis of all payments to GC Strategies and other companies incorporated by the co-founders, and all contracts with the Government of Canada, including all departments, agencies, and Crown corporations, including all subcontracts which GC Strategies and the before mentioned have been awarded under those contracts, and that the committee report this request and these findings to the House.
Do you need it read out in French, Mrs. Vignola, or was the translation fine?
La traduction était excellente. Je vous ferai pas subir ça. Ouais.
So it's
The translation was excellent. Thank you.
the entirety with the line added of this request, or these, yeah.
For this request and these findings to the
This
House.
request and these findings to the House, but otherwise it appears to be your amendment.
Can you just send it to us? Just send it over so we can have it.
Yeah. Mrs. Block, if you could just send it over in the meantime.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In looking at this motion, I do have one question. Actually, I have one question, and I think there's a, for the mover of this amendment.
The sub-amendment? Mr. Generous moved the sub-amendment that we're discussing
Okay.
right now.
Okay, so we're not talking about Sousa's amendment yet.
No.
Okay.
Let's finish the sub and then.
Just sending it out again.
Yeah, thanks.
I think they.
It's going out, but Mr. Sousa, quite literally is your amendment with added at the end that the committee report this request and these findings to the House, but otherwise it is your amendment in its entirety with that just added.
Chair, I think we're ready. We're not suspended, right? I think we're ready to proceed.
Maybe about 2 minutes.
You're not. Maximum, we've read it repeatedly to you, Mr. Sousa. I'm not sure how much more you need, but 2 minutes maximum, please. Generous sub-amendment.
Yeah, so right now we're at Mr. Generous sub-amendment to Mrs. Viola's, that's amendment, right? We're adding to it now? No.
Down Mrs. Vignola's.
Okay, so now we're using Mr. Generous's
It's
sub-amendment.
purely that one final line added to your amendment in its entirety.
Sorry, point of order, Chair. I think you misspoke a little bit. So just to avoid confusion, we voted in favor of Ms. Vignola's
sorry.
amendment.
Yes.
And then, yeah,
I apologize.
Right.
And I
But
don't mean to be
we
pedantic,
cleared that
but
as
just so there's
sub-amendment.
We voted in favor, but Mr. Generous is now amending that amendment, and I'd like to add to Mr.
No,
Generous.
we're not amending Mrs. Vignola's amendment. We voted it in, so we're back to basically your amendment. Mr. Generous's is now
making another amendment.
Right, so we're debating his amendment.
Now, and in debate of Mr. Generous's amendment, I'd like to add to it, keep it, but add a portion to it.
Just a point of order. You can't sub a sub, but you can.
I'm not trying to sub, I just want to suggest.
It would be, you would have to offer a sub-amendment to that sub-amendment.
That's what I'm trying to do, yes.
So we.
If
process-wise, we need to adopt.
I can't
the
adopt
sub.
it without the sub-amendment.
Yeah, sorry. We're dealing with the sub-amendment.
And I want to adopt it with the add-on, if I could add to it. However process that requires.
That's not allowed in the rules, though. You can't sub a sub.
So let's
So you need to.
But yours
vote
is not a
on
sub,
the sub.
yours is an amendment to my, to.
No, we're debating the sub-amendment.
All right.
Right now. If you're willing, if you want to accept it, and then we'll be back to your original amended amendment, and then perhaps someone else can put forward a change to that. Are we okay with that then?
Yeah, so in order for us to add to Mr. Genuis' sub-amendment,
Well, it'd be adding to the whole, not
would be adding to the
sub-amendment,
whole.
adding to the whole.
Of the, well, it has yet to be accepted, right? And then I would like to do that. If that's okay, we would agree to his amendment.
Right,
And then I'd
so-
like to add on an amendment to it. After it's,
Someone else will. Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry. Okay, well then, okay, fair.
So I'm sure Mr. Kuzmierczuk will, or someone else. Are we okay with accepting Mr. Genuis's sub-amendment, and then someone else can perhaps do Mr. Souza's change?
Yes.
Are we okay, everyone?
I understand, Mr. Charles.
Okay. Fine. Okay, so we, just give us a couple seconds so the clerks have it. So we are accepting Mr. Genuis's sub-amendment. And that's the one that we've read in a few times and have emailed out.
So basically,
So now
we
we're on
have
to
an amendment
Mr.
suggested by Mr. Souza that's been sub-amended twice, and both of them have been accepted.
So we're now on.
Now we are on
Yeah.
another
Oh,
sub-amendment
now we're
by
on.
our
Now
colleague.
we're talking on. Now we have a speaking order, and now I see Mr. Kuzmierczuk is up next to speak. But
you.
everyone, what if we're going to be changing anyone? It would be the email that just came out that had Mr. Genuis's change in it. So that's what we are debating. Back to debating right now. So recognize Mr. Kuzmierczuk is next on the speaking
So we're
list.
back on the amendment, and I would like to put forward a sub-amendment. There you go. Are we back on track?
Yes.
Yeah?
We
Okay,
are.
Good. And it reads as the following. Just add the following sentence to the end of that amendment, which would read, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests a government response.
Pretty simple. On the sub-amendment, Mr. Genuis?
Yes, Chair. The effect of this request, as my colleagues know, is that it delays the possibility of the response time requirement is 120 days, right? So we're in the middle of February. This means that effectively there could be no decision of the House on this matter until, taking into consideration timelines and so forth, probably until into the summer and then into the fall session. So I think notionally the idea of asking the government to provide their feedback on this is welcome, but the reference to Standing Order 109 is a sneaky attempt by the government to effectively prevent the House from pronouncing itself on this matter until the fall. And so I hope that the committee will join me in seeing through the continuing shady efforts of the government to bury this issue by stealth, and will not support this sub-amendment. Thank you.
Okay, we'll vote on the sub-amendment, or Mr. Kuzmierczuk's sub-amendment.
Recorded vote, please.
Yep.
Well, let's roll the dice.
Ms. Adwin,
Sorry, in favor.
Mr. Baines,
Yes.
Mr. Johari,
Yes.
Mr. Kuzmierczuk,
Yes.
Mr. Sousa,
Yes.
Mrs. Block,
No.
Mr. Genuis,
No.
Ms. Cussy,
No.
Madame Vignola, and Mr. Bachrach.
No.
Was that a no, sir?
Correct.
No. And there's a tie.
I will also say no.
So, chair says no. So, yeas pour 5, nays contre 6.
Back to Mr. Sousa's amended motion. Mrs. Block. And this is, again, the one, we're back to the most recent one that was emailed out. Mrs. Block?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And this may be a small point, but I just want to make it. And I also believe there is a typo in this motion. And I don't know if it's always left up to your discretion to deal with typos. But I do believe that the first statement that says that in light of new reports that GC Strategies and other companies incorporated by the co-founders, I think it should say have received millions of dollars. I know that we've been referring to a report that we heard that was released today, and it only referred to GC Strategies. I completely understand why you're including further down in the motion other companies incorporated by the co-founders and all contracts. I'm just pointing out that it's misleading to say that the new report identifies GC Strategies and other companies incorporated by the co-founders when it did not.
Are you offering a sub-amendment to change the word have, or? Can we
Yes, I'll offer that
can we have
sub-amendment
agreement
if it
that we'll
has
just
to
change the
be
word
done
has
that
to
way.
have? Ajit?
I think agreed.
Can't you just fix it?
Just on the word has to have, not the other issues that was commented on.
Have goes further into the past than has. That's the issue.
No, I think it's just changing grammatically. Yeah, it's just purely a grammatical thing.
Because they're two partners, and these two.
No, we're not addressing that. It's just have instead of has. It's purely grammatical, nothing else.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we are perfect. Thank you, Mrs. Block. Normally, Mrs. Vignola, the teacher, I expect that from you, and I'm sure that was coming later today.
Erreur grammaticale en français. Yes.
There was no grammatical in French.
Are we ready to go to a vote on this amended motion, everyone? On the amended motion, the final one that had been emailed out to her. Well, yeah, the one emailed out, but have and not has, because we agreed to make the grammatical change, the correction. Recorded?
On the motion as amended, Ms. Atwin?
Abstain.
Abstain. Mr. Baines?
Yes.
Mr. Johari?
Yes.
Mr. Kuzmierczak?
Yes.
Mr. Sousa?
Yes.
Mrs. Block?
Yes.
Mr. Janus?
Yes.
Ms. Kusi?
We're doing this first. Yes.
Madame Vignala?
Oui.
Mr. Bacharach?
Yes.
Yes pour 9, nays contre 0.
Wonderful. It passes. Colleagues, we are going to suspend.
So, Chair, just a point of order, I want to clarify. We've adopted the main motion now, so we're good?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
that's adopted. Mr. Bacharach, I think you have to sign out and then sign back in with a different Zoom. So we'll suspend for a couple minutes till we get Mr. Bacharach back.
I'll do that.
And then
I'll
we're
do
coming
that,
back in
Mr. Chair.
camera.
And I'm going to have a sub in person for the in-camera portion. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Souza, you have something for us?
Mr. Chair, thank you so kindly. I'd like to move a motion and to read it as follows. Dated today, February 14th, that pursuant to Standing Order number 108, 3C, the committee undertake a study on the government's work towards regulatory modernization, and that the committee examine matters including examining how to reduce the unnecessary administrative burden for individuals and small businesses, examining how to simplify regulatory processes, including certifications, codes of practice, without the need to make regulatory changes and the introduction of regulatory sandboxes, cutting unnecessary red tape to make cross-border trade easier through more consistent and coherent rules across governments, such as adopting national standards more widely, examining regulations that may impede international competitiveness. It goes on to say that the committee allocate 4 meetings to conduct this study. The witnesses be submitted to the clerk of the committee by February 28th, 2024, that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response. In the French and English versions, the date is may not be I think it's as February 21st, but we suggested February 28th.
For at noon for witnesses for this, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So February 28th at noon for witnesses for this. Thanks very much, Mr. Souza. We actually started one in the last Parliament. We actually had a motion in this one as well. So I appreciate you bringing it back. And I see Mr. Kuzmierczuk's border stuff on it. So I suspect this is involvement on that. Are we, I think I see agreement among all of us that we will, Mr. Cannings?
I would just say the NDP doesn't see the necessity of moving so quickly toward this, and we would rather this be scheduled after the Canada Post study.
This is just a motion. This is
Okay,
not
well,
to start a meeting.
But there's dates involved here.
No, I think it's the witness dates, Mr. Canning.
Well, as long as that's understood, then I mean.
Well, this is a motion to start, not to set dates or anything, and it's solely for witnesses. I understand your point, but it's not affecting that. Are we on agreement, everyone? So passed. Thank you for bringing it up. Very quickly on the Canada Post, I've reminded everyone several times, Friday at noon is cut off for witnesses for Canada Post. Before we go, Mrs. Vignola.
Très rapidement.
Yes, briefly. When I was speaking earlier in the first round with Ms. Hogan, I tabled a motion, read it in French. So the French version is the right one, and the English version will be drafted based on the French version. And I just wanted to ask whether you were in agreement with the production of these documents. It doesn't include at this point any meetings or anything else. It's really for the production of documents to complete an analysis. Do you agree with the motion that I sent you? Not this morning, but earlier, my first round.
Now, are you just asking that we're generally in favor and we will pass it at the next meeting?
J'aimerais savoir si on est prêt à voter.
I'm wondering if we can vote on it now.
Okay, Mr. Jory?
Thank you for that motion. In general, always we've been supportive of transparency and making sure that we get access to unredacted document given the circumstances. Can we ask you to consider until our next meeting for us to be able to really look at what the implication of that is? I understand it's a simple production of document, and I believe when are we meeting next?
Well, what's today? Wednesday, Monday, the
26th. So
can we agree we'll set aside 30 minutes to start?
Sorry?
Can we decide that I'll either make extra 30 minutes of resources available for this?
We just need some time to look at it. I don't think there's going to be an issue. Just we're going through so much production of documents that we want to understand what it is and what the implication is.
Dans ce cas-ci, pour
In this case, to answer your question here, we're talking about contracts of a value of under $2 million. And again, for all of those contracts under COVID alert that have to do with GC strategies. So it's not huge in terms of the production of documents. It's based on what I'm seeing. And there are some analyses that I can carry out, but not all. So that's why I'm asking for the documents. It's not really to wedge anybody. It's really to complete an analysis, really, and to be able to improve the process for the distribution of contracts and amendments, etc. So it should not be a phenomenal amount of documents. Actually, we might only be talking about 1 or 2 documents plus correspondence.
I think it's Mr. Kuzmierczuk, then Mr. Souza.
No, I was just going to ask, I mean, has this been circulated already, this motion with because I don't have it in front of me, and I'd love to be able to get a copy. I think, and again, you know,
The meeting went out.
For sure, and again, I just haven't had a time because we've discussed so much today. It's been such a jam-packed committee meeting that I haven't even had a chance to talk about it, nor discuss with my colleagues, nor even consider it. So I would definitely support the chair's recommendation, which is to set aside time in the next meeting to have this debate and discussion fully, so that we understand the implications of that motion.
Yeah, that might give us time to actually fix the translation as well. But Mr. Souza,
can we suspend? There's some discussion going on back here. I need to suspend. I'm sorry.
And Mr. Souza, your colleagues are moving one way. We're not going to suspend for you. Mrs.
Well, it's not for me.
Pingola?
It's.
je suis prête à.
I'm prepared to have us continue to discuss the matter until next Monday, or our next meeting rather. But we'd have to agree to the fact that at the next meeting we will be discussing this, as discussed, that it won't be swept under the rug.
I will right now. I'll put in at least an extra request for extra resources right now, so that we can address this.
Merci.
So an extra half hour or something. We'll also, I'll ask you to just, we'll have to get the English and French lined up properly. Are we fine with that, everyone, then? Good. If there's nothing else, we'll adjourn.
Jenica, I think you look very fresh.
Okay. And on that point, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your dealings with the AG today.